When you were 7 years old, a single summer afternoon could contain a universe. The walk to the mailbox took forever. Waiting in the back seat of your parents' car felt like geology, slow, layered, almost painful in its endlessness. And now you're an adult, and last March happened maybe 45 minutes ago. Entire seasons dissolve before you register they've begun. You are not imagining this. Your experience of time is physically, measurably different than it was when you were a child. And the reason cuts far deeper than, you're just busier now. It involves the speed of your eyes, the chemistry of your brain, and a disturbing question about whether the you who existed last year is still the same person sitting here right now. The oldest explanation comes from a French philosopher named Paul Janet, who noticed the pattern back in 1877. His idea was simple and mathematical. When you're 5, 1 year is 20% of everything you've ever experienced. When you're 50, that same year is just 2%. Each new unit of time is a smaller fraction of the total, so it registers as less significant. William James picked up the same thread in 1890 and traced it to what he called the monotony of memory's content. In other words, the more your days resemble each other, the fewer distinct impressions get stamped into your mind, and without those stamps, time collapses. It's a clean, elegant theory. It makes intuitive sense. But it's incomplete because it treats your brain like a calculator doing ratios, when, in reality, something far stranger is happening behind your eyes. In 2019, a mechanical engineer at Duke University named Adrian Bejan published a paper in the European Review that reframed the entire question. Bejan wasn't a psychologist, he was a physicist, and he approached time perception the way you'd approach fluid dynamics, as a problem of signal flow. His argument was that the speed at which your brain receives and processes visual information slows down, physically, as you age. When you're an infant, the neural pathways carrying signals from your retina to your visual cortex are short, fresh, and unmyelinated in ways that make them fire rapidly. Your eyes dart constantly. An infant's saccades, those tiny involuntary eye movements that scan the environment, happen far more frequently than an adult's. Each saccade is a new frame, a new snapshot of the world being stitched into your conscious experience. A baby's brain is basically shooting a movie at high frame rate. Yours, right now, is not. As you age, those neural pathways grow longer because your body gets bigger. They develop more branches and cross-connections. The insulation around them degrades. Signals take longer to travel, meet more resistance, arrive less frequently. Bejan's data showed that older adults process fewer mental images per unit of clock time than children do. This means your brain is capturing fewer frames per second. And here's what matters. Your subjective sense of duration is built from those frames. When you were 8 and staring at the ceiling during a car ride, your brain was recording densely, pulling in image after image. 5 minutes of clock time held dozens of mental snapshots. Now, that same 5 minutes holds far fewer. The clock hasn't changed speed, your camera has. But that's only half the story, because if it were just about processing speed, time would feel faster in a smooth, predictable decline from childhood to old age, like a gentle slope. And that's not what people report. People report that time lurches. A week in a new city feels long and vivid. A month of commuting to the same office evaporates. A vacation expands in memory even though it flew by in the moment. Psychologist Claudia Hammond gave this phenomenon a name in her 2012 book, Time Warped: The Holiday Paradox. Your experience of time is actually split into two separate systems. There's perspective time, how long something feels while it's happening, and retrospective time, how long it feels when you look back. These two systems often disagree, violently. When you're on vacation, perspective time races because you're engaged and stimulated, but retrospective time stretches because your brain formed dense clusters of new memories during those days. When you're stuck in routine, the opposite happens. Each day drags in the moment, but when you try to remember last month, there's almost nothing there. The weeks just smear together into a gray, undifferentiated blur. Your memory didn't record them as separate events, so looking back, they barely existed. This brings us to dopamine and to an experiment that changes how this whole picture fits together. In 2026, a team at UCLA, led by doctoral student Aaron Morrow and Professor David Clewett, published findings in Nature Communications showing that dopamine does something no one had cleanly demonstrated before. They put volunteers in an MRI scanner and showed them sequences of neutral images, ordinary objects, nothing exciting, while playing tones that switched pitch and ear at specific intervals. Those switches created what researchers call event boundaries, moments when the brain detects that something in the environment has changed. Every time a boundary occurred, a region called the ventral tegmental area lit up. This is one of the brain's primary dopamine factories. When that region activated more strongly, participants later remembered more time passing between the images, even though the actual elapsed time was identical. The dopamine surge at the boundary literally stretched the space between memories. Morrow described it as inserting small wedges into an otherwise continuous stream so that neighboring events stand apart. Think about what this means for aging. Dopamine production declines steadily over the course of your life. After about age 45, you lose roughly 6 to 7% of dopamine-producing neurons per decade in the substantia nigra, one of the brain's key dopamine hubs. Fewer dopamine surges means fewer wedges. Fewer wedges means fewer event boundaries. And fewer event boundaries means your months and years get compressed into shorter and shorter memory files. You aren't just perceiving time differently. Your brain is literally failing to segment your life into distinct episodes. Tuesday blurs into Wednesday. September blurs into December. You look up and a year has passed, and you cannot tell yourself a story about where it went because the chemical that was supposed to mark the chapters stopped showing up. Now layer on the reminiscence bump. This is one of the most consistently observed patterns in memory research. When adults over 40 are asked to recall personal memories from their entire life, they disproportionately remember events from between the ages of 10 and 30. Not early childhood, not recent years, that specific window. 68 studies across dozens of countries have confirmed it. The bump exists in every culture, in every demographic. The prevailing explanation, supported by researchers like Steve Jansen at Nottingham and Dorthe Berntsen at Aarhus University, is that this period is dense with what memory scientists call novel, self-defining events. First kiss, first job, first time living alone, first heartbreak. These experiences don't just get remembered, they become the architecture of your identity. They are the load-bearing walls of who you believe yourself to be. And once that architecture is built, you stop building. That's the part nobody talks about. After your late 20s, the rate of genuinely novel, identity-forming experiences plummets. Not because the world runs out of novelty, because you stop placing yourself in situations that require it. You find a career, a partner, a neighborhood, a set of restaurants you rotate between. You optimize for comfort and predictability, which are perfectly rational things to want. But your brain's timekeeping system runs on surprise. It runs on change. Every time you encounter something your prediction engine didn't expect, dopamine fires, an event boundary forms, and a new chapter gets stamped into the ledger. When you stop surprising your brain, the ledger goes blank. Pages still turn, but nothing gets written on them. So here's the question you've probably never asked yourself. If your richest memories cluster between 10 and 30, and your subjective sense of time depends on the density of those memories, then by the math of your own experience, you have already lived most of your life. Not in clock years, in felt time. A 40-year-old who has settled into routine may have decades of calendar time ahead, but the texture of those decades, the felt weight of them, the way they'll appear when you try to look back, could occupy less psychological space than a single year of your adolescence. The back half of your life doesn't have to be shorter, but if you live it the same way you lived last year, it will be. That is not a sentence about productivity. It is not about optimizing your schedule or waking up earlier. It's about the fact that your brain builds time out of change. Every novel conversation, unfamiliar street, uncomfortable challenge, or first attempt at something you're bad at is a tiny dopamine wedge driven between this moment and the last one. Each wedge makes your life longer. Not on the clock, in the only place that counts. Bejan described it as physics. Hammond called it a paradox. Morrow and Clewett showed it in a scanner. But all of them were circling the same truth. Time is not something that happens to you. It is something your brain builds, frame by frame, boundary by boundary, out of the raw material of everything you've never done before. The child staring out that car window on a summer afternoon wasn't living in slow motion because childhood is magical. She was living in slow motion because every single thing she saw was new. The clock on the wall never changes speed, you do.